No matter where you went, you could always find a public bath. The seventh hour found Marcus walking toward the Baths of Agrippa, following a path worn smooth by decades of Roman feet. Around him, thousands moved with the same purpose. The bathhouse wasn't luxury. It was life itself, as Roman as citizenship or law. The entrance fee was a single quadrans, the smallest coin in circulation. For that pittance, Marcus entered one of the most advanced infrastructures on Earth. The scale was astonishing. The Baths of Agrippa stretched across acres, with vaulted ceilings, marble columns from Egypt, and mosaics shimmering in filtered light. Yet the true marvel was hidden below. The Hippocaust system, a Roman invention of genius, channeled heat from underground furnaces through hollow floors and walls. Slaves fed the flames day and night. The air they heated turned cold stone into warmth. In the caldarium, floors reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit, so hot that bathers wore sandals to avoid burns. Marcus stripped in the apoditerium, the changing hall, leaving his clothes in a guarded niche. Then came the palaestra, the exercise court, where men wrestled, threw balls, and sweated in preparation for the ritual ahead. Bathing followed a sacred rhythm, hot, warm, then cold. The caldarium first, steam rising, pores opening, muscles softening. An attendant scraped his skin with a strigil, drawing away sweat, oil, and dirt. It was rough but cleansing. Romans believed purity required effort. Then came the tepidarium, where men reclined on marble benches, debating politics, betting on races, or sharing gossip from the forum. Finally, the frigidarium, a plunge into icy aqueduct water that shocked the body awake. Marcus surfaced, reborn. But the baths were more than hygiene. They were democracy in steam and marble. In that heat, senators and shopkeepers looked alike. Power softened in the haze. Strangers became equals. As daylight faded, the baths emptied. Marcus joined the crowd, leaving through echoing halls, one of thousands who had shared the same ritual of heat, water, and renewal. Across the empire, from Britannia's cold outposts to Libya's deserts, Romans built these temples of cleanliness. They were more than architecture. They were civilization made visible. Wherever Rome ruled, civilization followed. And civilization meant the right to bathe, to converse, to belong, to be Roman. The empire's cities were filled with graffiti. As Marcus left the baths and made his way toward the forum, his eyes, like those of every Roman, scanned the walls. Graffiti was everywhere, etched on every inch of plaster, a living archive of voices history almost forgot. On a tavern wall in the Subura, someone had carved with surprising tenderness. Successus, the weaver loves Iris, the slave girl of the innkeeper, who doesn't care for him. But he begs her to have pity. A rival wrote this. The drama of working-class romance, preserved forever in lime and dust. Next to it, simpler words. Gaius Pumidius Diphilus was here. The ancient equivalent of Kilroy was here. Proof that even in the 1st century, humans couldn't resist leaving their mark. In a public latrine, one Roman poet left this gem. Apollinaris, doctor to the Emperor Titus, had a good shit here. Someone replied below, whoever wrote this is full of shit. 2,000 years later, the world's first bathroom argument still holds its charm. Roman graffiti, especially the kind preserved at Pompeii and Herculaneum, offers historians a window into daily life no scroll or marble inscription could match. Without spray paint, Romans used styluses, nails, even broken pottery to scratch through plaster, an act of rebellion and remembrance. Marcus himself had left his mark near his favorite wine shop. Marcus Tullius Rufus, clerk, was here in the consulship of Flavius and Balbinus. It wasn't poetic, but it was permanent, or as permanent as anything could be in a city that never stopped rebuilding itself. These markings revealed a society startlingly familiar. Love notes. Marcus loves Spendusa. Political ads. Vote for Lucius Popidius Ampliatus. He gives good bread. Insults. Epaphra, you are bald. Crude humor. Secundus defecated here. And dry wit. It took 640 paces to walk back and forth between here and there 10 times. In a world where only a fraction could write, graffiti was the poor man's monument. The elite had statues and inscriptions. Everyone else had walls. To carve a name was to declare, I existed. Near the forum, Marcus paused at a new message. Gaius Julius Primogenius was here. Farewell, Carisius, wherever you are. A farewell not sent by messenger, but by faith that his friend would one day pass and read his words. Further along, a boast, the gladiator Celidus, the Thracian, makes all the girls sigh. Beneath it, Crescens, the net fighter, holds their hearts. Even men who fought for survival wanted to be remembered for love. This impulse stretched across the empire, from Hadrian's Wall, where soldiers carved jokes into stone, to Egyptian forts, where legionaries scratched countdowns to freedom. In Ostia, graffiti filled the port's walls with gossip, commerce, and satire. Where statues showed emperors and gods, graffiti showed everyone else. The voices of the street, the humor of the crowd, the unfiltered heart of Rome. Marcus walked on through the noise of the city, past walls layered with Latin and Greek, prayers and obscenities, jokes and longing. Together, they formed the first social network, a running conversation across centuries, written not in code or pixels, but in the dust of empire. The Roman workday ended at noon. Marcus's morning at the grain warehouse had been typical of Roman working life. He had arrived at dawn, when the first light made work possible without expensive lamp oil. For 6 hours, he had counted, recorded, and calculated, his stylus moving across wax tablets with practiced efficiency. The Roman system of timekeeping made this schedule universal. Without mechanical clocks, which wouldn't be invented for over 1,000 years, Romans relied on the sun's position to measure time. They divided both daylight and darkness into 12 equal units called horae, or hours. This meant that a summer hour when days were long was considerably longer than a winter hour when nights dominated. But everyone experienced the same elastic time, so the system worked perfectly well. Sunrise marked the first hour. Noon, when the sun reached its zenith and shadows were shortest, marked the 6th hour. Sunset marked the 12th hour. Simple, observable, and requiring no technology beyond a sundial or the ability to read the sun's position. For this reason, the Roman workday ended at noon. From the wealthiest senator managing his estates to the poorest laborer hauling goods at the docks, work stopped when the sun reached its highest point. What came after was leisure, and Romans took their leisure as seriously as they took their work. The afternoon belonged to entertainment. The Circus Maximus, Rome's massive chariot racing stadium, held races that drew crowds of 150,000 or more. The various theaters scattered throughout the city performed Greek tragedies, Roman comedies, and elaborate pantomimes that required no dialogue, only music and gesture. Gladiatorial games, though less frequent than popular imagination suggests, drew enormous crowds when they occurred. But most Romans, most days, spent their afternoons at the bathhouses. This wasn't laziness, it was culture. The baths provided not just cleanliness, but social connection. physical health through exercise and massage, and mental stimulation through conversation and debate. Libraries were attached to many bath complexes. Philosophers gave lectures in their gardens. Business deals were negotiated in their steam rooms. The contrast with modern life was striking. While today's workers might grab lunch at their desks and work through the afternoon, Romans considered afternoon labor to be somehow unnatural, a violation of proper living. Morning was for necessary work. Afternoon was for being human. This pattern held true across the empire. In Londinium, Roman officials ended their administrative duties at noon. In Alexandria, merchants closed their shops when the sun reached its zenith. In Antioch, craftsmen set down their tools and headed for the bathhouses. The Roman day had a universal rhythm, synchronized not by clocks, but by the sun itself. The Roman people loved to gamble. Evening found Marcus in a tavern in the Subura, the noisy working-class heart of Rome. The air was thick with smoke from oil lamps and the sound of dice clattering across wooden tables. Men shouted over the din, chasing luck as eagerly as they chased wine. His friend Gaius was already there, hunched over a gaming table, throwing tesserae with the intensity of a man whose rent depended on the roll. Gambling was everywhere in Rome. The poor wagered copper coins in taverns. The middle class played polished board games at home. The wealthy built gaming rooms lined with mosaics and marble, where fortunes changed hands under the flicker of lamplight. Fortune, to the Romans, wasn't just an idea. It was a goddess. Dice games were the most common. Each throw had a name, a superstition, a story behind it. Others preferred ludus duodecim scriptorum, the game of 12 lines, ancestor of modern backgammon. The stakes could soar to absurd heights. Men bet entire savings on chariot races at the Circus Maximus, or on gladiators whose lives could end before the next throw of dice. Technically, gambling was illegal. Roman law banned it outside the Saturnalia festival, when normal order dissolved and even slaves mocked their masters. But the law was ignored. Gambling never stopped. It happened everywhere, in markets, under porticos, in the shadow of temples. The magistrates looked away unless violence broke out. Even emperors couldn't resist. Augustus once lost 20,000 sesterces in a single night. Nero wagered public money as though it were his own. Claudius, obsessed with the game, wrote a book on dice strategy and commissioned a travel carriage fitted with a gaming table so he could play on the move. Marcus watched Gaius throw again. The dice bounced, rolled, and stopped. An unlucky throw. Gaius groaned. His opponent grinned. Copper asses slid across the table. Each coin represented not just bread or wine, but the thrill of chance itself. In that smoky tavern, men tested their courage against fortune. Women were mostly excluded. Only during festivals or behind private walls did they share in the games. In taverns and race grounds, gambling was a man's ritual, a way to flirt with the goddess Fortuna herself, the goddess who gave and took without reason. Roman dice were carved from bone or ivory, smooth from countless hands. Boards were etched into wood or stone, their patterns worn by centuries of play. Even language carried gambling's imprint. Romans had specific words for lucky throws, doomed ones, and the desperate second chances they called rethrows. For the Romans, gambling wasn't just entertainment. It was philosophy. It mirrored their belief that fate ruled all things, that fortune could raise a man to triumph or crush him without warning. To gamble was to meet fate on equal terms, to challenge the gods in miniature. As lamps flickered and shadows danced across the walls, Marcus finally joined a game. The dice rolled across the table, The coins gleamed in lamplight, and for a moment, the empire outside disappeared. It wasn't just a game, it was Rome itself. Strategy, risk, and the eternal hope that Fortuna might smile once more. The Roman Forum was the center of public life. Earlier that day, Marcus had walked through the Roman Forum, as he did most mornings. The Forum wasn't just a place, it was the pulse of the empire, the living center of Roman civilization. Here, the world of Rome gathered in marble and stone, where power and faith, trade and justice met under an open sky. Nestled between the Capitoline and Palatine hills, the Forum had evolved from a swampy burial ground into the most vital public space in the ancient world. Every layer of Roman life converged here: politics, religion, commerce, law, and daily gossip, all coexisted within this single valley of monuments. At the northern end stood the Curia, where senators in white togas debated the fate of provinces stretching from Britannia to Mesopotamia. Beside it rose the Rostra, the great speaker's platform decorated with bronze rams taken from enemy ships. From here, orators once thundered to the crowds, their voices echoing across the stone facades. The basilicas along the sides housed Rome's law courts, where advocates pleaded their cases. Cicero's words still whispered in memory, centuries after his death. Temples ringed the plaza like guardians of the state. The Temple of Saturn held the treasury of the Republic. The Temple of Vesta kept Rome's eternal flame alive, tended by the Vestal Virgins, whose failure to keep it burning was considered an omen of catastrophe. Nearby, the twin sons of Zeus, Castor, and Pollux were honored for riding to Rome's defense in its earliest battles. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Forum was no ivory tower. Beneath the colonnades, merchants sold spices from Arabia, silks from the East, and pottery from Italian kilns. Money changers counted coins. Scribes, their wax tablets at the ready, wrote letters for the illiterate and drafted contracts for merchants. The air smelled of incense and sweat, of baked bread and wet marble after rain. What made the Forum extraordinary was not just its architecture, but its accessibility. Unlike the palaces of Eastern kings or the forbidden temples of Egypt, the Forum was truly public. Any citizen could walk its stones, listen to Senate debates, watch trials, or join the hum of conversation around the fountains. It was, in a sense, the world's first open civic space. For Marcus, a clerk of modest means, the Forum meant belonging. He could stand where consuls had stood, walk the same marble as generals, pray to the same gods as emperors. In this space, Rome's ideals were not confined to its elite. They were embodied in its citizens. That was the genius of the Roman Forum. It united empire and individual, marble and humanity. Here, every voice could rise, every trade could thrive, every citizen could witness the machinery of power in motion. And as the sun set behind the Capitoline Hill, gilding the columns in red light, Marcus knew what every Roman understood: that this place was more than the center of a city. It was the beating heart of civilization itself. There was a temple where citizens could go to worship Caesar. One temple in the Forum drew Marcus's attention more than others: the Temple of Divus Julius, dedicated to the deified Julius Caesar. The building stood as a reminder of something uniquely Roman: the belief that exceptional human beings could transcend mortality and join the gods. When Julius Caesar had been assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, nearly 2 centuries before Marcus's time, the Roman people had been shocked not just by the murder, but by what followed. During Caesar's funeral games, a comet had blazed across the sky for 7 consecutive nights. The Romans, always alert to divine signs, interpreted this celestial phenomenon as proof that Caesar's soul had ascended to join the gods. 2 years after Caesar's death, in 42 BCE, the Senate officially declared him divine. The Temple of Divus. Julius was built in the Forum on the spot where Caesar's body had been cremated. It featured an altar where Roman citizens brought offerings, incense, wine, and small animal sacrifices, treating the former dictator with the same reverence they showed Jupiter, Mars, or Venus. This practice of deifying deceased leaders would become standard for Roman emperors who died in good standing. Augustus, Claudius, Vespasian, Titus, and many others would be declared gods after death, each receiving their own temples and priestly cults. Living emperors learned to navigate the delicate balance between accepting divine honors in the provinces, where such practices were traditional, while maintaining the fiction of being merely first among equals in Rome itself. The concept would have seemed strange to Greeks, whose gods remained firmly in the realm of mythology, and blasphemous to monotheistic religions that would later challenge Rome. But to Romans, the line between exceptional humanity and divinity had always been permeable. If the gods could intervene in human affairs, why couldn't extraordinary humans ascend to divine status? Marcus, like most Romans, saw nothing contradictory in worshipping both traditional gods and deified emperors. He might offer incense at the temple of Jupiter on one day and the temple of Divus Julius on another, seeing both as part of the same religious landscape that made Rome great. Conclusion. As darkness fell over Rome and Marcus climbed the stairs to his third-floor apartment, he reflected on nothing in particular. The day had been ordinary, distinguished by nothing remarkable. He had worked until noon, bathed at the Thermae, walked through the Forum, read fresh Graffiti, watched his friend gamble, and now prepared for sleep. What Marcus couldn't know, what no Roman of his generation could imagine, was that the lifestyle he considered normal would largely disappear from Europe after Rome's fall. The public baths would crumble, their sophisticated heating systems forgotten for over 1,000 years. The organized leisure time would vanish as survival became paramount. The urban infrastructure, the accessible public spaces, the very concept of universal citizenship granting rights to communal resources would fade into myth. Medieval Europeans would look at Roman aqueducts and bathhouse ruins and wonder what race of giants had built them, unable to conceive that ordinary humans had created such marvels. The practice of public bathing would be forgotten in much of Europe, replaced by suspicion of water and infrequent washing. Cities would lack the sewers, the public facilities, the organized planning that Romans took for granted. But on this evening in 135 AD, Rome stood at the height of its power. The empire was secure, the frontiers stable, and trade goods flowed into the city from every corner of the known world. Marcus lit his small oil lamp, lay down on his sleeping couch, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again. He would wake at dawn, work until noon, and spend the afternoon much as he had today. It was the rhythm of Roman life, repeated by 1 million people in this city alone, and by millions more throughout an empire that seemed eternal. The Romans called their city Roma Eterna, the eternal city. They believed it would last forever. In a sense, they were right. Long after the Western Empire fell, the daily patterns of urban life that Romans like Marcus established, the public spaces, the social rituals, the very concept of organized city living, would survive in the DNA of Western civilization itself. Marcus Tullius Rufus would leave no monuments, father no famous sons, earn no place in history books. But he was Rome, as surely as any emperor or general. His ordinary day, repeated millions of times across centuries, was the foundation upon which the empire's extraordinary achievements were built. And in the morning, he would do it all again.